Do you ever feel like the world today is just a little bit too hopeful? Things are just a little bit too light and breezy these days. And would you prefer it if things got maybe a little bit darker and a bit more depressing? Well, lucky for you, Stephen King has a new adaptation that's going to you up. Welcome to Flicks and Chips, where today we're going to be talking about The Long Walk, directed by Francis Lawrence and starring Cooper Hoffman and David Johnson. So The Long Walk is a movie that's based on Stephen King's first ever novel. A lot of people think that Carrie was Stephen King's first book, and that is correct. It was his first published work, but the first book he ever wrote, and I believe it was in his teenage years, was this little beaut, The Long Walk, and it was originally published under his pseudonym Richard Buckman. This movie is set in a dystopian future where the United States government has completely collapsed, the economy is in the toilet, and the once great United States of America now sort of exists in the shadow of more powerful nations. And so with the collapse of the government, America has fallen back into a sort of like authoritarian military rule, and basically nobody can escape the drudgery of this messed up economy except one way. And the only way they can do it is by volunteering for the annual Long Walk. So the Long Walk is a televised contest between 50 young boys, and each one is representing their state. And it's a really simple game. All they need to do is just walk in a straight line on a road at 3 miles per hour. If they drop below 3 miles per hour, you get the first warning by the military trucks that are like driving either side of them. Do it again, you get a second warning. Third warning is a bullet in the head. And then basically the last boy standing wins. He gets millions of dollars, and he also gets a wish granted. And he can wish for anything. He can get anything he wants. In the opening scenes, we see all of the boys arriving at the very beginning. That's kind of like the starting point of the Long Walk. And through a little bit of banter, they all introduce themselves. You get a feel of the characters that are going to be like all of the contestants. I gotta say, like, the dialogue in the opening scene is a little bit corny. There's just a couple of lines where I thought, like, there's this one kid, I can't remember his name, but he says something like, hey, Jimmy's the name, walking's my game, and it's like, all right, Jimmy. There's just a couple of lines like this that felt a little bit stilted. But after the opening scene, the dialogue got much better. In my opinion, it started to get much more believable. Just like in the book, this is a very self-contained story. I mean, all of the information that I gave you, that's pretty much all of the information you're gonna get. You're not gonna see the world really outside of this walk, other than maybe one or two quick flashbacks. We just don't see what the wider world looks like. All we see is the road and the boys that are walking on it. And even the road that they're walking on is pretty featureless and flat. It almost reminded me of, you remember like those platform games from the 90s where the background is just pretty much the same thing over and over again, and it's just like scrolling by in the background. It was a bit like that. Every now and then you see a burned out car, or you see like an animal carcass. But yeah, other than that, it's all about the characters. This is a very character-driven story. And so it's lucky then that all of the actors are putting in these really great performances. The lead character is a kid named Raymond Garrity, and he's played by Cooper Hoffman. That's Philip Seymour Hoffman's son. He was really great. He was really good. I think he's also in Licorice Pizza, and he was good in that as well. He is this likable young guy. His mother drops him off at the very opening scene. That's how the film begins. His mother's dropping him off, and so they get this like tearful goodbye, and immediately you just feel for this kid. You feel for this character and his mum. Unlike all of the other characters that are doing this for money, to escape poverty, it seems like you kind of get the feeling early on that maybe he's just doing this for another reason, maybe a more enlightened reason. He thinks that the walk offers him some kind of higher purpose. And then you've got Pete, who's played by David Johnson. And although he's the co-star, I think he was probably the best thing about this film, in my opinion. I actually liked all of the characters, but he was the best one. He's very philosophical. He's kind of like a guiding light to all of the other young boys that are competing. Even in the darkness, he can find like the silver lining and just focus on the beauty of an individual moment. Like he's the sort of bloke that you want beside you when you're going through a rough time. We get to know all of the characters, and one of the things that I enjoy is, just like the book, they're all pretty distinct from one another. They're all motivated by different reasons. They have lots of conversations about the people who are counting on them and waiting for them back home. And because we know them all really well, when one of them falls behind the pack and they just can't go on any further, you really feel as though this is a character that you know you're about to watch them get executed. And this just happens over and over and over again. I should say as well that this film was pretty graphic. There's some shots which took me by surprise a little bit, where other movies, like other thrillers and horror movies, usually they'd sort of cut away and maybe you'd hear a gunshot or something like this. But in this film, the camera lingers and even zooms in. And so we see a bullet impact a face of a character that we quite like. You can imagine how graphic things get when characters maybe pick up an injury and then they have to keep walking on that injury for another 10 miles, another 20 miles, another 50 miles. And it's rough. I'll say this though, like if you've read the book, and I'm not going to give any spoilers in this review or anything like that, but if you've read the book, I feel like the level of exhaustion that is represented in the book that the characters are feeling is a little bit more than is in the movie, I think. I remember feeling that these people were basically David Goggins level, grinding it out, just like almost to the point where they're starting to hallucinate and that sort of thing. I didn't get that feeling in this movie as much, just the level of exhaustion. But it's very graphic, pretty gross in some parts. And there's actually a few differences between the book. I'm not going to say what they are, but I just feel like if you have read the book, there's enough differences where when you watch this, it's still going to be able to take you by surprise. And I'd also say this as well, thanks to the performances of the actors, I think I actually prefer the movie to the book. That's quite rare. Usually, always, as you know, the book was better. It couldn't capture the originality and the magic of the book. This is one of those rare occurrences where, no, I actually think the movie was better than the book. I think back when I read it earlier this year, I gave it something like a 3.5 stars out of 5. And I think that this film gets a little bit higher than that. Mark Hamill as well. I didn't even mention Mark Hamill. He's really great in this. It's actually the second Stephen King adaptation starring Mark Hamill that I've seen in the past few weeks. He was also in The Life of Chuck, and he was good in that as well. In this film, Mark Hamill plays the Major, and he's like this ice cold, super ultra nationalist figure who sees The Long Walk as more than just like a spectacle for people back home to watch on their televisions. To him, this is a crucible. It's a way to harden the nation that's got soft by forcing its youth to sacrifice and to suffer and to prove their worth and to demonstrate what's possible, what the human body is capable of if it's pushed to its limits. And he believes that by grinding citizens down to their absolute limits, then America can sort of like claw its way back into superpower status that it enjoyed in the past. He's very cold, he's very commanding, and he's just utterly convinced, no one could convince him otherwise of his vision. He's one of these blokes where he's like, listen, I know that I'm right, everyone else is wrong, and I'm not going to be questioned. And he sort of like embodies this terrifying idea of patriotism when it gets weaponized into cruelty. Another thing that I like about him as well is that you never see his eyes during the whole movie. He's wearing these like dark military sunglasses. And I think that that's really effective because he's basically this emotionless practically faceless evil. Watching this cast of like all of these young actors, I thought was great because it felt like the future of Hollywood was on display. Like one of those films where I feel like I'm going to look back in about 10 years and say, what was the first film that I saw him in? Oh yeah, it was The Long Walk back in 2025. Yeah, no, he was really good in that. I knew he was going to be big. Watching the chemistry between Cooper Hoffman and David Johnson was great as well. It was actually really sweet in places. In fact, I would say I would be stunned if I found out that the two of these weren't friends in real life after making this movie. Like, not only friends, but good friends. Their relationship was just really fantastic. I liked it a lot. The supporting cast were all really good as well. There's one character who sort of seems to be a villain or a bit of a bully, kind of. And he's giving all of the other boys a bit of a rough time and trying to get inside their heads. And I actually found him to be one of the most interesting characters and the most watchable actors in the film. I thought he was great. Other than the acting, I felt like the pacing and the way that the film builds tension is probably the best thing about it. I mentioned how the film opens up with a pretty light scene where all of the characters are sharing banter and all that kind of thing. But after the first execution, it sort of, from that point onwards, alternates between conversations between the characters and the camaraderie that they're all sharing to incredible close-up violence, and then all of the characters' sort of reaction to that, and then the groups sort of like slowly reforming and picking up their conversations again, more walking, more pain, more torture. The further that they get into the walk, the more sort of like the quicker that people fall off from the pack and the more injuries start to mount up, and then the more tension builds, and it's like progressively more and more tense. For so much of the film, I was sitting there in the cinema and I was sort of like tensing up a little bit, because even when the characters are having these little conversations, you hear a warning over the speakers from the military that they've dropped below the limit. And I kept sort of like biting my nails thinking, oh man, like don't drop below the limit again, because you're going to get a bullet in the head. I kept sort of like expecting it, waiting for that sound of the gunshot. And every time a gunshot was fired, it's not like I jumped. It wasn't like a jump scare or anything like that, but my molars kind of like clenched together. I was like, you know, because it's such an ugly sound, and they really pump up the volume of the gunshot, I think, to a good effect. I think one of the really clever things, like from the director, was to shoot all of this in sequence of the story. That's great. I think that's really good, because obviously they're going to be taking a lot of footage of them just walking. They probably shot hours and hours and hours of it over the course of however many weeks they were filming this. And I think it's unavoidable that a lot of the actors would have built up friendships. And so as the characters start to get taken out one by one, it must have genuinely felt to the actors as though they were losing a friend, in the same way that, you know, when a friend leaves work and you know, they're not dying, but it's like, oh man, I'm going to miss him. I really like that. I really like that guy. I really like that girl, whatever. It must have felt a little bit like that. And slowly it's like they start off with 50 of them, and it slowly like dwindles down and down and down to the last man standing, obviously. I think the sound is a really important element of this movie as well. I already mentioned like the horrific sound of a gunshot cracking, but also towards the end, all of the characters start, you know, heavy breathing, and their footsteps are quite loud. Their footsteps become a little bit clumsy as they try to just keep marching on. If you've ever run a long distance race, it sort of feels like that, right? Like the noises that your body is making sort of become amplified until that's all that exists. So yeah, I think the film really captures that really well. There's a nice message as well, I think, to the film. There's a few different thematic elements, but it doesn't hit you over the head with it. There's a lot to do with the dangers of ultra-nationalism, the desperate actions that people are willing to take when an economy collapses. And I think above all, sort of like this, survival versus humanity. Like, because even though the boys are all competing in this sick game, they're still able to experience camaraderie and brotherhood on their journey towards their, almost certain death. And so, yeah, I think there's just like a little light thread in this otherwise like really dark story. If you like this movie, I think you'll also enjoy The Hunger Games, definitely. That was also directed by Francis Lawrence. Also, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? That's a film from the 1960s, set in the Great Depression. I'd say probably that film is a bit of a spiritual cousin to this one. It's about I think they do like ballroom dancing in this dance hall, and you just have to keep dancing. Got to keep dancing. And then the last one standing wins this big cash prize in the middle of the Great Depression. And then also, obviously, The Running Man, another Stephen King adaptation. There's the Schwarzenegger movie, but also there's another version that's coming out this year with Glenn Powell, which I'll also be reviewing as well. So yeah, big Stephen King adaptation movie year. Okay, so it's time to do the ratings. And then after we do all of the ratings, we'll update the top 10 list for 2025. Just before we do that though, this is my very first review on this brand new channel. And in the beginning, when a small channel is starting out and trying to find itself and find its voice, it's just like it makes a massive difference when people like the video and subscribe to the channel. So I really appreciate you for clicking on that little button, supporting this small movie review channel in an ocean of movie review channels. That's only if you like the review though. Maybe you thought, it's a bit rubbish. Should have clicked off ages ago. Anyway, let's do the ratings. So for the plot, I'm going to give it 3.5 stars out of 5. It's a pretty straightforward plot. Literally, they're walking in a straightforward line. Nothing is overly complicated about it. The characters, though, and the acting, this is where the film really shines. I thought the actors, especially, as I mentioned, David Johnson, were amazing. I just can't wait to see David Johnson in some more stuff in the future. Really excited for that. The sound, I'm going to give the sound, like I mentioned, it's a big part of it. So I'm going to give it 4.5 out of 5. It's just this huge part of the film, the way that they're able to capture the struggles of a body breaking down and just that repetitive bang, mess me up every time. The directing, I'm going to give 3.5 out of 5. Difficult to judge really, because again, it's such a a lot of the shots are pretty straightforward, but I think the director was brave to show these close-ups of this just absolute carnage. Some pretty gross stuff happens. And then overall, what did I give it on Letterboxd? I gave it 4 stars out of 5. Solid, good film. Now here's the question. Did The Long Walk make it onto my top 10 list for 2025? Let's take a look at the list as it currently stands. And as you can see, we've got in the number 10 spot, Predator, Killer of Killers, followed by Anora, then Warfare, F1, Superman, Caught Stealing, which I actually saw just last week, The Ballad of Wallace Island, Conclave, Sinners, and the best movie that I've watched so far this year is Weapons. And so did this movie make it onto my top 10 list for 2025? Yes. And so here's an update to the top 10 list so you can now see that The Long Walk is sitting in the number 6 spot. That's a solid spot. That's a solid spot for this late in the year. It's a good film. I enjoyed it. And if you like this review and you'd like to see another review from me from a movie that just came out recently, then you can click up here. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it.